The dust in the Bitterroot Valley did not just settle. It choked the life out of everything. Garrett Vance wiped the stinging sweat from his brow. His hand was rough and calloused. He had spent years in hard labor. His palms were mapped with scars of iron and wood. It was a hand that had forgotten the meaning of rest. He looked down at his 7-year-old daughter. Her name was Lily. She sat in the parched gray dirt. She was trying to weave a crown from dried grass. The stalks kept snapping beneath her small fingers. She looked like a small bird fallen from a high nest. The year was 1888. Montana was beautiful, but it could also be cruel and unforgiving. The terrible winter of 1886-87 had devastated the cattle country. They called it the Great Die-Up. Thousands of cattle had perished in the drifts. Countless ranchers had been ruined in a single season. The blizzards had piled up like white, suffocating mountains. The cattle had frozen where they stood. They were trapped against the wire fences. Now the summer sun was finishing what the winter ice had started. The sky was a relentless pale blue. It offered no hope of rain. There was no mercy in that shimmering heat. Garrett had exactly $3 in his pocket. He had a hungry daughter beside him. He had one last chance to give her a home. Grief still sat heavily in his chest. He looked up the long, dusty drive of the Silver Hawk Ranch. It was the grandest spread in this part of the territory. A massive house of stone and timber stood at the end of the road. It looked like a fortress built to withstand the elements. A massive windmill turned slowly in the distance. It was a silver ghost against the burning sky. But even the mighty Silver Hawk was screaming for mercy. The irrigation flumes were bone dry. The wood was bleached white by the sun. The cattle were rib-thin and listless in the pastures. Garrett picked up his battered leather tool bag. The leather was cracked from 1,000 different jobs. The brass buckles were green with age. He had been a bridge engineer once. He had worked for the Northern Pacific Railway during its great push west. He understood how to move the earth. He knew how to tame the wild, rushing rivers. He knew how to span the impossible gaps between mountains. But hard times had cost Garrett his railroad job. Then the fever had come to their small town. It had taken his beloved wife, Mary, in a single week. She had slipped away quietly in the night. He was left with a child and a void in his heart. Now he was just a man with a heavy hammer. He was a father with a silent, hungry daughter. He walked toward the main porch of the great house. His boots crunched on the parched earth. It sounded like breaking bone. A woman stepped out from the deep shadows of the veranda. Evelyn Thorne was not what Garrett expected. She did not look like a struggling rancher beaten by the dust. She wore a dress of pale green silk. It looked like a cool oasis in a burning desert. Her hair was the color of wheat just before the harvest. She looked like she belonged in a grand ballroom, but her eyes were sharp and intelligent. They were guarded and fierce. Since her husband's death, Evelyn had managed the Silver Hawk alone. She spent her days bargaining over cattle prices. She studied every account with a weary eye. She had been fighting the bank for every week of survival. Now her legendary determination was running out. "We aren't hiring any more hands," she said firmly. Her voice was like velvet rubbed on gravel. It was a rich, commanding voice, but it was also very, very tired. Garrett tipped his worn hat with a slow motion. His fingers grazed the frayed felt of the brim. "I'm not looking for a hand's wage, ma'am," he said softly. He kept his voice low for Lily's sake. "I heard your main hydraulic ram pump is shattered. I heard the men from Missoula gave up and went home, and I heard you offered $1,000 to anyone who could bring the water back." Evelyn leaned against a sturdy porch pillar. The wood groaned under her slight weight. Her gaze swept over Garrett's dusty, worn vest. She saw the frayed cuffs.
She saw the dark dirt under his fingernails. She saw the way he stood as a shield for his daughter. They didn't just say it was a loss, she sighed. She looked toward the heat waves on the mountains. They said the mountain itself had shifted during the spring thaw. They said the water source was gone forever. If that water doesn't flow by the end of the month, the bank takes it all. The Silver Hawk will be nothing but a memory in the wind. She looked over the brown, dying pastures with bitterness. It made Garrett's own chest ache with recognition. She was a widow left with a kingdom turning to dust. "I can fix it," Garrett said. There was no boast in his tone. It was the flat certainty of a man who knew steel. He understood how stone obeyed the laws of weight. Evelyn let out a short, hollow laugh. It sounded like pure exhaustion. She looked at the distant horizon. She felt a sudden, reckless spark of mischief. It was a shield against her own paralyzing fear. "Save my ranch, Mr. Vance, and I'm yours," she joked. She spread her hands wide to gesture to her crumbling empire. It was a bitter jest made by someone with nothing left to lose. Garrett did not laugh. He did not even crack a smile. He looked her straight in the eye. His gaze was deadly serious. "I don't want a ranch, Mrs.
Thorne," he said. His voice was steady and grounded. "And I don't want a woman who gives herself away as a prize." Evelyn felt the heat of color rise to her cheeks. "I want a warm bed for my daughter," he continued. "I want 3 square meals a day while I work. And if I succeed, I want the $1,000 you offered, enough to buy a small piece of land with a reliable well." Evelyn felt a flush creep up her neck. The joke had fallen flat. Something much more raw and real had taken its place. She looked down at little Lily. The girl was watching a grasshopper in the dirt. She was so small and looked so very fragile. Evelyn's heart softened. The ice around her grief finally cracked. "Agreed," Evelyn said. Her voice was steadier now. "You can stay in the old foreman's cabin. It's dusty and small, but it is dry. My cook, Martha, will see that the girl is fed well." Garrett nodded once. He did not waste time with thanks. He took Lily's small hand in his. They walked toward the cabin. The next morning came far too early. The sun had not yet kissed the mountain peaks. The air was cool for one brief moment. Garrett began his work at the first light.
The pump house was 3 miles up the jagged canyon. It was a difficult climb over treacherous shale. Stunted pines clung to the bare granite. When he reached the site, his heart sank. The pump was a monster of cast iron and brass. It was a marvel of engineering, but now it was a jagged mess of metal. A rockfall had crushed the vital intake valves. The main piston was seized tight by rust and grit. Garrett spent 2 days dismantling the intake. He cleaned the grit with painstaking care. He reshaped the bent fittings by hand. He used a portable forge to heat the metal. By the end of the second day, the ram could move. But without water feeding it, the machine was useless. The real problem was the water itself. He could hear it humming deep inside the rock. It was a low, ghostly sound. It vibrated through the granite beneath his boots. The mountain had indeed shifted during the winter. The creek had been diverted into a subterranean void. The water was there, but it was out of reach. Behind the stone, Garrett could hear a stronger current. He could feel the diverted creek pressing through the fractured rock. It was a hidden river trapped in a dark prison. As the creator of this story, this struggle over water feels surprisingly close to the present. Even today, parts of Montana still face drought and water supply pressure. It reminds us that one dry season can affect ranches, food, and entire families. The tools have changed since Garrett's time.
But the dependence on reliable water has not. Garrett spent hours studying the wet seams in the granite. He listened for the faint movement behind the stone. Railway work had taught him how water searches for weakness. Nature always leaves a key if you have the patience to find the lock. Down at the ranch house, Evelyn could not sit still. The silence of the big rooms felt like a weight. She went to the foreman's cabin to check on Lily. She found the girl sitting on a quilt on the porch. Lily's face was clean. Her hair was neatly braided. Lily was holding a small wooden doll. It was missing an arm. "Where is your father, Lily?" Evelyn asked softly. She sat on the edge of the weathered porch. "He's up with the mountain," Lily said proudly. Her eyes shone with love. "Papa says the mountain is just a big puzzle. He says he can talk to the rocks and make them listen." Evelyn looked at the girl's small fingers. Lily was trying to sew a scrap of fabric to the doll. Her technique was clumsy. She looked frustrated. "Here, let me help you," Evelyn said. She took out a small silver sewing kit. She began to show Lily how to do a proper stitch. As she worked, she felt a strange peace. She and her late husband had never had children. The big house was usually deafeningly quiet. But here, it felt different. There was the smell of pine and the sound of chatter. It felt like a real home should feel. Evelyn imagined Lily's laughter filling the empty rooms. The thought frightened her. She realized how badly she wanted it. "My mama made this quilt," Lily whispered. She touched the faded fabric with reverence. It was a double wedding ring pattern. "This blue bit was from Papa's old railway uniform. This yellow was from my very first baby blanket." Evelyn traced the careful stitches. Her eyes misted over with unshed tears. She saw the immense sacrifice in every line. She realized Garrett Vance was not just a drifter. He was a man carrying his entire world on his back. Up at the pump house, Garrett's hands were raw. He had been hauling heavy stones all day. He had no dynamite to blast the granite. He only had a pry bar and a massive sledgehammer. He had his own stubborn, unbreakable will. He began to dig a new channel through the rock. Every swing sent a jolt of pain through his arms. By sunset, he realized he had chosen the wrong seam. Hours of back-breaking work had gained him nothing. Garrett sat against the granite, exhausted. He wondered if the men from Missoula had been right. Then he noticed a thin line of moisture.
It was several yards above his first cut. It was a tiny, glistening promise of life. He thought of the bank notices on Evelyn's desk. He thought of how she looked in that green silk dress. He wanted to save her for more than just the money. On the third day, the weather changed violently. A massive storm rolled in from the Bitterroot Range. It came over the peaks like an invading army. The temperature plunged with terrifying speed. The cold rain turned to biting sleet. The wind was horizontal. It stung the skin like needles. Garrett was high on the ridge when the front hit. The sky opened up in a fury of ice. He knew he should head down immediately. But if the fissure sealed again under ice and debris, he might never find it twice. The mountain was trying to hide its secret again. He could not let that happen. A thin stream of water was leaking out through the crack. If he could just widen it by a few inches, the pressure would do the rest. He swung the hammer with everything he had left. He let out a primal, defiant roar. Lightning split the darkening sky. It illuminated the canyon in ghostly white light. Garrett did not stop to catch his breath. He worked until his muscles went completely numb. The cold crept into him until staying awake became a struggle. The world was turning into a frozen gray void. Down at the ranch, Evelyn was pacing the floors. The wind was rattling the heavy window panes. "He's still up there, isn't he?" she asked. "The fool man won't come down," Martha grumbled. "He's got the devil's own stubbornness." Evelyn grabbed her heavy wool cloak. "He'll freeze to death in this," she said. "I'm going up there to get him." She went to the stables. She saddled her sturdiest mare. The trail was a nightmare of mud and ice. Evelyn climbed through the howling dark. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. She did not know why she was risking her life. She barely knew this man's middle name, but the thought of him dying alone was unbearable. She finally found him, slumped near the iron pump. He was shivering violently. His face was frighteningly pale, but his hand was still locked around the hammer. "Garrett!" she screamed against the storm. He looked up with glazed, unfocused eyes. "The water," he rasped. "It's coming. I felt it move." Evelyn did not care about the ranch anymore. She wrapped her cloak around him. She pulled his heavy arm across her shoulders. Inch by painful inch, she helped him to the shelter. Inside the pump house, she wrapped the cloak around them both. She held him close, sharing what warmth she could. They huddled together in the dark for hours. Evelyn talked to him to keep him conscious. She told him stories about her childhood. She told him about the first time she saw Montana. She confessed the truth about her joke. "I saw you standing there in the dust," she whispered. "I saw you with that precious little girl. And I thought, that's a man who knows how to hold things together. I had forgotten what it felt like to believe someone might stay. I haven't felt safe in a long time, Garrett." Garrett let out a long breath against her neck. "I'm just a man with a hammer, Evelyn," he whispered. The storm finally broke at the first light of dawn.
The world was washed clean and sparkling with frost. Evelyn woke up to a rhythmic sound. It was a low, steady, rhythmic thumping. Thump, hiss. Thump, hiss. She looked toward the massive iron machine. The repaired hydraulic ram was working. The water Garrett had released was feeding the system. The pressure was fueling the heart of the ranch. Garrett was watching the water flow with a smile. They rode back down the mountain together. When they arrived, the ranch hands were cheering. Water was gushing from the pipes into the garden. The dust of the drought was being washed away.
Lily came running out of the cabin. She was screaming with joy. She danced in the new, glorious mud. Garrett slid slowly from the horse. He sank to his knees in the wet grass. He had found the weakness the mountain had hidden. The weeks that followed transformed the Silverhawk. Green slowly returned to the pastures. The cattle began regaining their weight. Evelyn sold enough cattle to make the bank payment. She proved the ranch could survive. The bank withdrew the foreclosure notice. The Silverhawk was finally safe. Garrett spent his time recovering from the ordeal. He sat on the wide porch in the afternoons. One evening, Evelyn joined them. Lily squeezed between them with a book. She stumbled over the difficult words. Garrett helped her with a patient voice. When Lily read an entire sentence, she looked at them. She was waiting for them to be proud. Evelyn laughed before she could stop herself. Garrett looked at her over Lily's head. They shared a quiet, knowing moment. They looked like a family. Later that night, Evelyn found him in the barn. He was mending a leather harness. "I have the money for you, Garrett," she said. She held out a heavy, cream-colored envelope.
Garrett looked at the envelope. "Thank you," he said. "This will buy us a very good start." "Where will you go?" Evelyn asked. Her voice was small and vulnerable. "There's good land near Flathead Lake," Garrett said. "I want to build a house with my own hands. Lily needs a place to grow some deep roots." Evelyn nodded slowly. Her throat felt very tight. "She's a wonderful girl, Garrett. You've done a brave thing raising her alone." She turned to leave. She didn't want him to see her eyes. But Garrett caught her hand. His palm was rough and warm. "Evelyn," he said, "about that joke you made on the first day." Evelyn froze in place. "I know it was just desperate words," she said. "I was being foolish." "It wasn't just words to me," Garrett said. He stepped closer. "I've spent my whole life fixing things. I've fixed bridges and broken flumes, but I don't know how to fix a broken heart, except when I'm standing here with you." Evelyn looked up through a shimmer of tears. "I'm a wealthy widow, Garrett," she whispered.
People will say you only wanted the ranch. Let them talk until they are hoarse, Garrett said. I've lived through a Montana winter. I can handle a few wagging tongues. He reached into his vest pocket. He pulled out a simple silver band. I bought this in town yesterday, he said. Before my Mary died, she told me something. She said I shouldn't walk this earth alone. She told me that if I ever loved again, I should choose someone who understood what it meant to build a life and stay. He knelt down in the golden straw. I may not have much yet, but Lily and I would never let you face this place alone again. Evelyn Thorne, will you let us stay, not as guests, but as your family? Evelyn did not answer with words. She threw her arms around his neck. She sobbed into his shoulder. She felt his strength like a solid rock. Outside, the windmill turned gently. The water flowed through the emerald fields. By early autumn, there was a wedding on the lawn. It was a gathering of honest neighbors. Martha made a magnificent cake. Lily wore a dress of white lace and silk. She looked like an angel. Evelyn wore the pale green silk dress. She wanted to remember the day they met. She realized wealth was nothing without love. They stood together under a vast sky.
The preacher spoke of enduring love. As they exchanged vows, a hawk circled high above. After the ceremony, they sat on the porch. The sky turned deep purple and gold. Garrett had his arm around Evelyn. Lily was asleep at their feet. "You still haven't told me the truth," Evelyn whispered. "How did you move that rock with no tools?" Garrett smiled a secret smile. "I didn't move the mountain, Evelyn," he said. "I just found the soft part that wanted to give way. Everything in this world has a soft spot.
even granite. And even a stubborn widow's heart, she teased. Especially that, he laughed. His heart was finally full of peace. In the years that followed, Garrett helped others. He brought water to many struggling ranchers. But no matter where he went, he always came home. Lily grew up strong and independent. She was the heart of the Silver Hawk. She eventually went east to study medicine. She wanted to help people through their suffering. Garrett was incredibly proud of her. On her own wedding day, Evelyn gave Lily the old quilt. But the quilt was different now. Evelyn had added a square of pale green silk. It was from the dress she wore when she met Garrett. "This is our story now, Lily," Evelyn said. A story of how a desperate joke turned into a beautiful life.
Lily hugged her mother tightly. "I still remember the sound of that old pump," Lily whispered. "It sounded like a heartbeat." "It was," Evelyn said softly. "It was the very heartbeat of our family." The Silver Hawk remained standing tall. It stood as a monument to a man with a hammer and a woman with vision. It stood for the love that saved them from the dust. If Garrett, Evelyn, and Lily's story touched your heart, tell us in the comments what moment stayed with you most. And if you enjoy stories of courage, family, and second chances in the Old West, subscribe and join us for the next journey.